I was going to sing this morning. I was thinking about my daughter. I'm not sure where she's at and how she's doing. I haven't heard from her for a while. And I still love and pray for my daughter. And I do hope and pray that God has His way. I used to sing this with my dad, and we got it from a visitor that came from the States. And when he gave it to my dad, and it was on a little, like a little leather sheet, and it was written in ink. And it's called The Sinner's Dream. Last night as I lay sleeping, a dream came unto me. I dreamt about the end of time and of eternity. I saw a million sinners fall on their knees to pray. The Lord, He sadly shook His head, and this I heard Him say: sorry, I never knew you. Depart from me forevermore. Sorry, I never knew you. Go serve the one you served on earth. I saw my wife and children. I heard their loving voice. They must have been so happy. Oh, how they did rejoice. With robes of white around them and crowns upon their head, my little girl looked up to me, and this is what she said: Daddy, we can't go with you. We must go to the joys of the Lord. Sorry, but we still love you, but you can't be our daddy anymore. And when I was awakened, tears were in my eyes. I looked all around me, and much to my surprise, there was my wife and children still here with me, and falling down upon my knees, you should have heard my prayer. Father, who art in heaven, I know you gave your only Son. Forgive me and let me serve thee, for I want to be ready when you come. and let me serve thee, for I want to be ready when you come. Amen.
Thank you, Richard. It's a very visual song. It's also nice to hear about the different generations, and that's why we're here, right? We want to take care of our family and help others around us. So thank you so much. Well, welcome this evening. I know it's a little bit late. The Kleenex boxes are gone, so I have nothing to throw at you if you're falling asleep here tonight, but we'll make it through. We're going to change gears here a little bit tonight. We've been talking about mindfulness, and we talked about understanding addictions, the sobriety puzzle. Tonight we're going to talk about parenting, and very specifically, parenting with Generation Z. They're a very different generation than any other generation in history. They're completely different. And I know that it's very frustrating for a lot of us older generations, but there's a lot of reasons why they're different. And we're going to get into that tonight, and we're going to have some fun. So there's Dr. Jolene Earlacher, who is in the U.S. I'll leave that on here so you can see her website's down at the bottom, leadingtomorrow.org. So if you go to leadingtomorrow.org, she has a lot of different podcasts on Generation Z. So she'll have different featured speakers that know the subject matter. She's had me on there a couple times. I changed it again, didn't I? She's had me on there a couple times, but she's really the genius. She is phenomenal. Just love listening to her. Everything I've learned pretty much has been from her. So she's a psychologist in the U.S., and we've been having a good time talking about Generation Z. There are coaches and teachers that are really anxious to learn, why does this generation learn so differently? So, today we're going to be asking the question, who are Generation Z, and what should I know to work with them? Now, we're going to do a little history slide here for a second, just so we can figure out where people are. The silent generation, that was the generation that's seen and not heard. They were from the years 1928 to 1945. Now, we're all familiar with the boomer generation. After the war, came home, lots of babies happened. I don't know why, but they are from the year 1946 to 1964. Generation X, born 1965 to 1980. Millennials, Generation Y, they're born in 1980 to 1995. Generation Z, who we'll be talking about tonight, they're also called the Homelanders. They were born in 1995 to 2010. And the newest generation, anybody after 2010, are called Generation Alpha. Looks like we're going to be starting all over. So, those are the generations. I'm not going to ask you what generation you were born in, but each generation had something very unique about it. They had either a hard work ethic, or they were very thrifty, or they were very free-loving, or they were, everybody had something different. They also had something in their generation that was the thing to remember. It was the thing. So obviously World War II was a pretty big thing to remember. For that generation, most will remember where they were during the war, right? After that, was the Kennedy assassination, or landing on the moon, things like that. That defined that generation. I remember. I knew exactly where I was when I heard about it. Then after that was the towers falling in New York. Most people can remember where they were when they heard about that, right? Generation Z is a generation that's very unique. Obviously, COVID will be the defining thing that they'll remember, and how they were not allowed to graduate. They had to be stuck at home. They were not able to hang out with their friends, which is a huge pivotal part of any teen's life. So there was a lot of what they would call mental anguish during COVID. So that's probably going to be the thing that defined them, or defining moment. But they are a very interesting generation because they're one of the first times in history that it's not their community that defined them. It's not their community that defined them. It's not even their country, quite frankly, that defined them. Now, it's a generational, global movement. So what they watch for music and movies in North America, they watch in India, they watch in Africa. They can all relate to, I don't know, Listen Linda on YouTube. They all know about that. Everybody knows about that. Like they all communicate. They listen to the same stuff. It's a global generation, which has never happened before. Technology has united them. So the current urban generation, connected by consumerism, social media, and the entertainment industry, forms the largest global culture to ever exist. It spans the globe, sharing the same values, listening to the same music, watching the same movies, and sharing the same posts. So what I want to do here is actually talk a little bit about what's the difference between modernism, which is what you and I worked very hard to achieve. We tried very hard to modernize this world. And the Generation Z are what are called postmodernists. And they are almost anti what we worked hard to build. In fact, a lot of pastors, I've been on a few conference calls, a lot of pastors are trying to figure out why people aren't coming to church from that generation. And once you understand their way of thinking, you're like, oh, I still don't agree with it, but okay, that might make a bit of sense. So we're gonna talk about how our generation is objective reality. Truth is truth. Gravity exists. If I drop this, it falls, it hits the ground. That's a reality. That's a truth. But for some reason, Generation Z calls that a subjective reality. And it's subjective truth. It can be debated. And I've had a few debates with some of these younger generations, and they'll say, well, that's your reality. Or that's what you interpret the Bible to mean. I'm like, no, I pretty much just read the Bible text. That's not what I think it means. That's what it actually says. That's truth. And they'll get into an argument with me. I'm like, they're like, well, that was written by somebody that was their interpretation. And you started to get down this road that is like, oh, I just want to pull my hair out. But they believe in it's all subjective. Our generation believes in cold, hard facts. Now, we know facts can be manipulated a little bit in research and all that sort of stuff, but, facts pretty much are facts. But for their generation, it's a lot more emotional driven. Everything is so emotional. And I thought it was my kids, but it seems like it's a lot of the different kids. They're just so emotionally driven that I've had to talk about EQ and EQ development and, get some grit and be tough and, but it's so emotionally driven, a lot of their decision making and what they decide to do. For us, things involve logic. For them, it's story. For us, it's reason, and for them, it's experience. Right now, one of my contracts I do is working with missionaries that are preparing for the field, and I work with about 30, 35 missionaries in preparing them for their different stages of going, and most of them are Generation Z. And for them, it has nothing to do with what they can achieve while they're over there, because that would mean that there's reason and facts and logic, and this is what you can achieve. For them, it's all about, what could I expect to experience? What could I expect to feel when I'm over there? How can I make a difference in the world through my skill set, my experience? So it's not about being a part of a mission. It's about my experience being there. So it's a very different kind of way of thinking. Proof is reality for us. Perception is reality. If Rihanna says something on YouTube, that has to be the truth. It doesn't matter if your professor said something. Rihanna said different. And so we can really wrestle with that. Well, hang on, that's just a movie star. But for them, perception is everything. YouTube, Instagram, all of those social media platforms, that's the truth. It's not necessarily what's been published in a book. Institutions, we worked hard to build up churches, communities, governments, colleges, businesses. We worked hard to establish those institutions and companies. But for them, they believe that it should be individual driven. If they don't see a place for them in it, they don't care about it. There's not a bigger part of a collective, which is weird. To not see yourself as part of the community, that's a foreign concept to me. But for them, it's all about, well, what's my part in the community? If I don't see it, then I don't care about the community. I don't care about church. But if I have a place in church, well, that's different. Creation, growth mindset, we fought for that to be able to build. And theirs is a cancel culture, deconstruction. If you say something wrong, we're going to call you on it. It doesn't matter. You could be destroyed overnight. You have to be corrected. You have to be sensitive to what our thoughts are. And then finally, education. We sat in classrooms like this. If a professor came up front and taught a class, we listened. Sit down, line up, all that sort of stuff. They just cannot stand that. They cannot stand things like this. You won't find them here. They would rather sit with a friend and talk about education and, hey, watch this clip and you watch this clip, and that's how we're going to learn. We're going to learn through YouTube and social media. We're not interested in sitting down for a lecture or a class or anything. In fact, some of the modern classrooms I've been to in some of the universities here in BC and in Alberta, they don't have classrooms anymore. It's workstations. They're all just workstations. And the teacher doesn't teach anymore. My kids get very frustrated. I think they're old school. They're like, I don't know why we're even paying these teachers. They don't even teach. They sit there waiting for questions, and then when you ask them a question, they come and ask you more questions. It's like they want me to figure out the answer. I don't know the answer. You're the professor. You teach me. So they're very different. But Generation Z will wait in their little pod. They'll try to research it. They'll figure it out themselves. And then if they get stuck, they might come and talk to the teacher. So it's a very different classroom environment than what we were used to. So, what else do we know about these youth? Youth are struggling more than ever to represent what they believe in a postmodern culture. In a culture of trigger warnings, they are worried about saying something that might be offensive, making them less likely to speak frankly. And right now you almost see a bit of a pendulum swing that there are really popular speakers on the internet and that have podcasts because they're very strong and they speak their mind, and some kids are starting to tune into that because they're almost getting tired of this triggering language. You can't say anything anymore. You can't have an opinion. And so my son is listening to these harder core podcasts because they have opinions and they have values and they're not afraid to say them. So this one has some interest. We're entering an age of acceleration. Because of the explosive power of exponential growth, the 21st century will be equivalent to 20,000 years. I don't know how they come up with this, but 20,000 years of progress at today's rate of progress. Organizations have to be able to redefine themselves at a faster and faster pace. And that even comes to churches. How are we adapting to the fact that kids aren't coming in anymore? Are we going out? Are we going out to meet them? Are we setting up walking groups? Are we setting up think tanks to involve them? One of the things that we're learning to do is, hey, you're a Generation Z, can you help me make a video? Don't necessarily need to make a video, but it's a chance to get in front of them, get their opinion, get their ideas, and help them feel included in part of our process of some kind. Just really looking for ways to involve them in projects because we need your skill set. I don't know what I'm doing. I really need you. And that's the way to get that generation involved. That's one way that it's evolving. So, this generation has unparalleled access to a constant flood of information. They have developed the ability to quickly scan for what's relevant, often with a shorter attention span. Back in my day, there was something called Sesame Street Syndrome. When we were kids, some of us, at least, were able to watch Sesame Street Syndrome. Today, the letter of today is G, and here are all the words that start with G, and they talk about a specific topic for 30 seconds, and then whoosh, off they go to Big Bird, then off to something else, and it was a 30-second time span. And psychologists were really concerned back then that this is not good. How are these kids ever going to make it through school? But we adjusted, we learned. Now you can sit through a couple-hour lecture and hold your attention. That's on a good day. But Generation Z seems to be going back to this almost Sesame Street syndrome, where Instagram and YouTube shorts are 30 seconds. My kids have even said, I can't watch 4 minutes of a YouTube clip. It's got to be a short. And they just stick to the shorts. Give it to me fast. I'm on to the next subject, right? They don't necessarily rely on adults or experts to obtain information. They're going to seek it. And they'll probably find it out faster before I can even get out a dictionary or something, right? They can access information whenever it's needed. And they learn more from portable devices than traditional classroom settings. I think it was a little while ago, we took out a map. And they're like, what is this? Like they didn't even know what a map is. Well, it's sort of the same as the map on your phone. Well, which way does it go? It was a foreign concept. It's kind of funny. Generation Z has come of age with Alexa, answer the trivia and homework questions, to never having to carry cash thanks to Venmo and other cash apps, to following their favorite YouTubers going to college, while streaming their favorite music on Spotify. Generation Z is not living the same experience as millennials. So this idea of buying an album, I remember my kids saying, Dad, why on earth are you paying $1 for a song? Just listen to it on Spotify. I'm like, okay, so I tried Spotify. I'm like, that's nice, but as soon as we got a reception somewhere, you have no music. That's it. Whereas I grew up on 8-tracks. Anybody remember 8-tracks? Some of you are They're like, oh, that's so new technology. We listen to records. But yeah, I don't think anybody here was a gramophone. Nobody here was a gramophone, right? That's going too far back. It's going too far back. You've seen it in a museum. Generation. Yeah, that's a silent generation. They're not going to speak up and say anything anyways.
I've seen it in the family's home.
That's funny. So, like we talked about earlier, gone are the days of the sage on the stage. They're not going to listen to people that are smart and teaching. They are more thinking of guide on the side or meddler in the middle. They want to have small groups where they can just leave me alone, let me learn my own lesson plan. I have a teacher in Vancouver that said, the government wants us to do lesson plans. We're required to do lesson plans. We don't follow the lesson plans because it's up to the kids. We give them the topic and they go create their own lesson plan and figure out and find the information and teach themselves. So they're like, I don't even know why we're being paid to do lesson plans anymore. So student-centered education meets students where they are at. It gives students a voice. Technology gives information. Teachers provide information. YouTube and in-person group activities are the preferred learning methods. So, let's talk a little bit about some of the technology trends just so that we're all on the same page and are aware, because we may not be. This may be new information for some people. But 95% of Gen Z use social media at least once a week. Now, we kind of knew that. 31% of Gen Z feel uncomfortable being away from their phone for 30 minutes or less, while 14% say they cannot be away from their phone at all. That's hooked. 65% of Gen Z are on their smartphones after midnight at least a few times a week. I mean, we were running youth groups here this week, and that was a common thing. They were up till past midnight because, I'm sure they were on their devices of some kind, right? 42% of young people under 8 now have their very own tablet device, up from 7% 4 years ago, and less than 1% just in 2011. In fact, I was watching a very interesting documentary, and it talked about how, I don't know if it was the top 10 or top 20 high-tech company CEOs forbid their kids from owning any technology or being on any social media under the age, I think they were even in their teens, and they weren't even allowed to be on social media or have their own technology. So what did the CEOs of these major high-tech companies know that we don't know? Perhaps how addictive it is and how it affects our brain development. They're aware. Risks start to increase with screen time of 2 hours or more a day and go up from there, with high use linked to considerably higher risks of suicide and unhappiness. Do you want to hear something really disturbing? To me, this stat blows my mind. I don't have it on here. Kids today have less sunshine time than maximum security prisons. Imagine who are the human rights would advocate for a lot more than 1 hour a day in maximum security prisons. They were furious when they heard that that's inhuman to treat prisoners with less than 1 hour of sunshine a day. That's crazy, and they would fight to have this time increased. But prisons sort of stuck to that time. And imagine we're voluntarily allowing some of our kids to be okay with not being outside. Back in my day, man, get outside. You'd get the swift kick to the butt if you were go outside and play. They never saw us. We were gone sometimes all day. Mm-hmm. How many of you were gone all day? Anyone? Yeah. Just always outside. having fun and getting into all kinds of trouble, especially this front row, I think. I think they were. Yeah, I see the smiles behind the glasses. All right. So, signs of technology addiction. Ready? Now, even though this is a talk on Generation Z, I actually want to see you apply it to your life. Because I think that sometimes we lead by example. I know I can't be far from my phone. In fact, I heard there's a recent psychological study that showed that if you even have your phone in your hand, that the person talking to you interprets that as, I'm not important enough that you even put your phone away, that it's even out of sight. That people will perceive that as, you're not connecting with me as much as you could be. So that's interesting. So I don't struggle with this. So see how much of this applies to you. Individual gets anxious or angry if they don't have their device. You ever get anxious secretly? Oh my gosh, I lost my phone. Right? Tech usage negatively impacts schoolwork, relationships, or other interests. And jobs. We're including ourselves there. Individual stays up later and later with device or computer. I know I'll look over, it's getting close to midnight, and we're still both texting and getting in our last things of the day, and I'm like, oh, we're supposed to be off. They recommend an hour before bedtime. Put your device away. That blue screen time, that blue light or whatever, right? Individual seems more apathetic or bored more easily. And I know I've noticed this with my kids. They'll say, I'm bored. Well, dear old dad, I don't react very well. Even though I'm a counselor, there's still a few things that get me. When somebody says I'm bored, well, that's because you're bored. Go out and find some adventure and some fun, right? I have to be careful with what I say. Individual has more difficult time regulating emotions. There's more outbursts, more easily. If you suggest time to get off the gaming system and go outside, what? No, that's unfair. And there's, this big fight. Emotional regulations aren't happening. Individual falls asleep in classrooms and meetings. We're going to fall asleep here soon too ourselves if I don't keep it. I need that. Where's that candy I should be throwing out at people? That worked for the kid. I'm not telling you what we did with the kids this week. So, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, because we know that there are challenges and why. They're a very different generation. But I really want people to walk out of here with some ideas of how to change things up a little bit differently with the people in your life that are Generation Z. So, how can we help, or what can we do? Well, one of the first things you can do is to encourage some times of silence and solitude. You won't die. Tell you what, let's all put our phones down. We'll play a board game tonight. Let's all turn off our devices and go for a walk outside. The problem is, these devices have phones, and anytime we want to go somewhere beautiful, like me today on the beach, I was taking video and chatting with my wife and showing her how beautiful. It's unfortunate. It's all built into this one device, and we kind of need it now. But you want to have times where there is solitude. There's a pastor. I don't think I'm going to remember his name. A pastor that he's not Adventist. He studied the Sabbath so hard, he was so convicted of the Sabbath, that he said, not only am I going to observe a full day of rest, I'm going to turn off my devices on Sabbath. I cannot be interrupted during my time to rest. And I'm like, could I do that? No, I don't think I could. Look at how much we're using today, right? It's built so much into our society, but imagine encouraging our kids, just put the device away. One rule we have at our house is no devices at our table. When we're eating a meal, nope, No devices, put them away. We're going to converse, catch up. But every family is going to have different roles. Another thing we can do is to limit access to technology. No device before 10 or after 10. No device 1 hour before bedtime, whatever their bedtime is. Just really encourage the limited access to technology. I know some people have even said 1 hour TV a day and that's it. Whether it's a gaming or TV, that's it. No more. You're going to have to do something else. Encourage intergenerational relationships. Now, I'll be honest, this is why your culture, in my mind, is so much further advanced than any other culture, because intergenerational is so interwoven into the fabric of your community. I think it's brilliant to be able to stop in the elders. When we went in this week, there were kids walking around and interacting, and I'm like, man, that is awesome, right? Did my kids ever go to a home or no? We lock our parents up, right? There's different reasons for things, but hanging out with the Opa, hanging out with the elders, hanging out with grandpa and grandma, really encouraging that intergenerational transfer of knowledge. It's deadly important. Will only trust leaders they believe that are authentic and make mistakes. So one of the things that we're teaching people on some of these podcasts are, if you're a pastor, if you're a teacher, if you're a leader of any kind, that you need to adjust and talk about your mistakes. Sometimes we try to hide that as leaders. We want to present as very put together and with it. But this generation is looking for the opposite. They want authenticity. So they want to hear how you really screwed up this week. They want to hear how you and your wife had an argument and how you resolved it. They want to hear vulnerability and authenticity, which is very different than a lot of other generations. There's stuff you just didn't talk about in public, right? So yeah, that's very different. You want to be able to prompt with questions of choices rather than give direction. They hate getting a direction or go do this or go do that, go do this. They just despise that, this generation. And so one of the things you can do to adjust to that is listen. There's a few chores that need to be done in the home. There's doing the dishes, there's sweeping, there's doing the laundry. Which would you like? That's the way they like to be approached. But to say, go clean your room, no. They will run from that kind of direction. It's got to be choices. So you can either clean your room or you can do this. Think of something worse, like scrubbing the toilets, I don't know. But they like choices. Don't give the answers, but rather encourage problem solving. My day, I honestly wanted the answer. Hey, I'm trying to learn how to do this. How do you operate this grinder? Hey, tell me how. But they're wanting to be given the grinder and then say, how do you think you should operate it? Let's try a couple different ways. And you watch them actually grind away their finger or grind in the wrong direction, and then they sort of figure out sort of the hard way. But they have to figure it out themselves rather than be given direction, which is very frustrating for employers right now. They hate that. Now, I have to spend so much time teaching this generation. That's because they're different. You can't teach them the way that we were learned. You whack in the back of the head and, oh, got it, yep, right? It's just very different. They're much more individual. They don't think collectively as a group. They think, how do they see themselves in it? So you want to suggest how they are needed. We talked about that a few minutes ago, but how are you needed here in this church? I need specifically you, not your generation, you specifically, because you know how to do this, or I think you would be great at this. I really could use your help. Could you see yourself doing that? It would probably be amazing for you. What kind of experience do you think that would teach you? Give them a job that only they can do and recognize their individual skill. That's amazing. You know how to do that. Nobody else here does. That's phenomenal. Create media content just for them and ask them to create it. So for example, one of the things we're doing at church is starting to have our own YouTube shorts. Some people are going to watch it, but our pastor is really tuned into that. He's like, we need to be appealing to this generation. And so he's even asking them to contribute to some of the content. And it's getting them back involved. So those are some ideas of what we can do differently. One of the last things I want to talk about is this here. Some more ideas, but it's more about, instead of less practical ideas, it's more about overall attitudes towards things. So what I'd like to suggest is that no matter what our age is, if you want to engage with Generation Z, I think we need to learn how to embrace technology. Now, I remember when my mom, when they invented ATM machines, she cursed at them for the longest time. What is this newfangled machine? They're going to steal all my money, right? Anybody remember the ATM machines when they first came out? Yeah. I know my mom just cursed them. Now, I think she's on the computer more than I am. I'm pretty sure. She knows how to get this and that and this and that. She's embraced technology, right? I think that in order for us to move forward and connect with the youth, we have to learn more about technology. I think that we should all be familiar with Instagram. And I don't even know what all of them are. TikTok, Square, MyFace, whatever they are. Like, I think that we need to learn about them so that we can relate to the kids and ask them, hey, what did you learn on this interface or whatever? You'll figure it out. Snapchat. We need to be able to incorporate it in the way that we teach at church. We need to be able to incorporate it in the way that we teach at schools. And we need to be able to know what some of the languages that they even use. A little while ago, I said something that totally dated me, I'm sure. Something like, well, that's fat. I thought I was being cool, and they're like, Dad, no one talks like that anymore. That's so cringe. I'm like, what's cringe mean? You got to keep up with the language. Prioritize mental health. This one kind of blows my mind. Some of these generations we talked about didn't talk about your mental health. That was never talked about. Our generation is trying to promote it. We need to talk about our mental health. We need to lower the stigma on a lot of these mental health conditions. Their generation is embracing it. So much is about your mental health and how you feel. And how's this going to affect me? Our generation would say, well, suck it up. Or develop some grit. Or, get over it and get tough and all that sort of stuff. Their generation hates that. Their mental health really is important to them and how they feel. So we need to also focus on mental health well-being, and we need to discuss it a lot more around them. Foster independence. We need to learn how to, if we're going to engage with Generation Z more, we need to learn how to encourage critical thinking, decision-making, and learning from mistakes. So rather than giving direction, we need to be asking them, like my son and I are trying to fix his Volkswagen GTI car, whatever. We've made a lot of mistakes on this thing. I'm not going to lie. It's costing us a lot. But he's constantly, okay, Dad, I think we need to do this. And he'll whip through YouTube and show me a bunch of different things. And we're like, okay, well, that needs this kind of a wrench and this kind of a thing. And we're figuring it out. And a lot of times I'm like biting my lip because I know a little bit. Like, I know you're not supposed to disconnect a hose without knowing what's in it, right? Like, there's just some things you should know. But I just bite my lip because I know that's how he's going to learn. And I just let him learn through mistakes. And then we ask critical questions afterwards, like, what did you learn? Well, maybe if I watched a couple more videos, it would have told me what's in that hose. I'm like, okay, then next time we'll learn. It's a longer route, but that's the way they learn. So we have to be patient with that. Maintain open dialogue. Now we know this. Obviously we're trying to engage and draw the kids in and talk to them. I know what it's like to there's so much grunting. I had no idea. How's your day? Or one word answers, good. Like, okay, what was good about it? Stuff. Okay, tell me more. It's like, come on, drawing it out, right? But we want to have that open dialogue. So we want to create a safe space for honest conversations without judgment. You know, it's very easy for some of us older generations to say, well, that was a dumb thing to do, right? Like, that's a very easy thing to say. Well, why'd you do that? That's not a safe space. I know it sounds fluffy, and I know that there's people that want to roll their eyes around this sort of stuff. But it's just the way this generation is, and unless we learn to adapt, we're going to lose connecting with this whole entire generation. We can't afford to do that. We have to adapt. We're the adults. We're the ones that can learn and figure things out. So, we want to model healthy relationships, demonstrate respectful and loving relationships. Right now my daughter's getting a job in Victoria that's going to be pretty big for her, and suddenly I'm getting all these calls, like in the last few days. So I'm mildly suspicious. She always talks to Mom. Why am I getting all these calls? Well, now I learn it's because it's in the industry that I've worked in for 30 years. So now she's sitting up and paying attention and, well, Dad, how do you resolve this fight? And how do you resolve that? And what do you say to this person struggling? And I know I'm going to be on speed dial for the next few months. But it's just interesting that we've modeled how to be in relationship with people. We know how to do conflict resolution really well. And so you want to be available for that and model it as much as possible, because the generation is watching us. And we want to be able to show them that we know what we're doing. Last thing is to stay informed and flexible, to adapt your parenting style to meet their changing needs. Like I said, if we don't adapt, it makes me cringe knowing that this generation is going to be raised by somebody else on social media rather than parents. I don't know why. That makes me cringe. We're still very much needed. We're needed to model those healthy relationships, needed for advice, needed to continue to parent, quite frankly. But we just need to dial it back in our approach and be able to be that much more patient with people. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of how to work with people using more technology, getting more acquainted with it, being a lot more flexible in our approach and in our language. I think that there are some fantastic books out there on understanding Generation Z. I actually even did a YouTube search on Generation Z speakers. I found a lot of comedy. Oddly enough, a lot of comedians are making fun of this generation. It's pretty easy to do. But I think we have to have a lot of compassion, and we have to try to understand them. So do a bit of research, find some more ideas, find some more speakers. I didn't have a ton of time to get into this. I could probably spend a week just on this, especially with Jolene's work that she's done. But I wanted to give you a few ideas of what they're up against, and then some ideas of what to do. One of the talks I actually had to do on a podcast was on understanding Generation Z and trauma. So I had to talk about trauma and how does it affect Generation Z? And one of the things that a lot of us don't realize is that when we had World War II, it ended. Yeah, it was a lot longer than people thought, but it did come to an end. When the Vietnam War came, it came to an end, right? Everything in our generation had an end. Generation Z has no end to their trauma and what they're exposed to because they're on a global clock. And everywhere, somewhere in the world, is a trauma that they're being plugged into and fed on. And so they're always in a hyper-vigilant state of anxiety. They're always being triggered. For us, I would hope that at some point it turned off. But for them, it's constant and nonstop. And so I think that warrants us being pretty compassionate with them, especially when it comes to, I don't get them, right? They have it hard in different ways that we never did. And so, conversely to that concept, I also want to talk about how, in my mind, they're the unlikeliest generation to help us here towards the end. They're also going to be the most pivotal, positioned generation to create change than any other generation. So I think that they deserve our support and they deserve our compassion in trying to understand them. So I guess they're frustrating. Don't kill them. Be patient. Try to get in their shoes a little bit more. Try to understand what their multiverse looks like. And I'll close with this here from Elizabeth. The one who is talking is the one who is thinking, and the one who is thinking is the one who is learning. I think it's important for us to listen more, watch them stumble, watch them learn, and see how we can assist along the way. So that's all I had. Any questions or comments from anybody?
I'd like to make a quick comment. You know, growing up, I came from a very traditional home, and things were a lot different. Directions, like you were saying. Directions, you do this, you do this, you do this. I tell you what to do, and you learn from that.
Right.
In this generation here, and specifically my son, who's living at the edge of the Generation Z,
Right.
it was totally different. So for me, I had to try to understand where he was coming from because it was totally different from my generation and growing up. So there was a lot of things that as a parent, and I had to really lean on the Lord, lots of prayer to help me to understand how to reach his heart. Because there was a lot of times like you, I had to just say nothing, but actually show a lot of love and compassion the entire time. Because like you said, a lot of it is emotionally driven. And so that is something that was really huge. But, you know, you can reach your children through a lot of prayer, a lot of patience, and trying to understand when. And asking the Lord, help me when to speak and know how to speak.
Right. And I'm learning to ask more questions.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I think that that's working. And at first, it was really rough. I'm like, well, why did you do it that way? And right away, they can tell the tone. You're like, well, that's not helping, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, well, that's interesting. I would have done it this way. You chose to do it this way. I'm really curious how you arrived to that conclusion. I must be missing something. That's amazing, right? And you just sort of draw them in with, well, I was watching a clip,
Yeah.
and this is what I taught me. So just asking way more questions.
Yeah, and the long story short is, there was a lot of confrontation when I tried to parent him
Right.
the old traditional way.
Right.
To where there was a lot of rift constantly happening. And where I felt that either something needed to change or I was going to lose my son and communication with him.
Yeah.
But in doing it in a different approach, it's drawing him back in. And our relationship is really good today. So, yeah.
What else, I'll get to the question, what else are people finding works? When you're talking with the newer generation, what are you finding is working? Yeah.
When I was younger, my granny used to counsel us at a lunch or dinner when we were all at the table. And one particular dinner at her place, she's talking to us, and we're like thinking, why is she saying this to us? And after she was done her counseling with us, she says, I tell you this now, it won't mean nothing to you now. And I tell you while you're eating, because while you're listening and swallowing what I'm saying. And then it'll come back to you. Now I know. And as I grew older, I hit a situation and I'm like, now I know what she was saying. Because she drilled it into us that family values were very important, no matter what had been said or done. And to always, how we say Gwa'sala, to counsel our young people. Because the old people say when someone's out of hand, it's like they weren't taught. So the old people had a really unique way of teaching us our family values and life skills.
So again, the idea of doing it around a dinner table so that there's commanding attention and without the technology. So it's just, I see you. Okay, good. Someone else, what's working? Yeah.
We have Gen Z grandkids.
Right.
We have a couple that were born in '96. The way they were raised really impacts how they are. One has, you could be very curious and he'll just come out with all, he takes up the challenge, he knows everything about everything. It's like,
So informed.
Yeah, and so being curious whets his appetite to know more.
Yeah.
And listening. Whereas the other one is, may not have been as supportive or whatever.
So you're finding being curious is what's really helping and working for that.
Helping us,
Yeah.
bond or work with, and
Yep. I like that idea of it whets their curiosity. That's an interesting way of looking at it.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? What's working for you in Generation Z?
Can you repeat what Generation Z, what's the age and what's the years?
Yeah, that's a good one. Slide.
Typically, they're from 12 years right now to 27.
Right there. So 1995 to 2010. Yeah.
Okay.
You had a question also.
Well, just a comment, I guess, what's working. We have a 4-year-old grandson, great-grandson actually, and he likes to ask questions. And I think, that's a good way to teach. But he also likes to do things on his own. He's always saying, Papa, let me do it.
Right. Yeah.
So, I like that in a way, but there is some danger sometimes. You said maybe you're working a grinder. You have to teach him the dangers of a grinder, right?
It's true.
Because there's sparks flying. He can get something in his eye.
Yep.
You have to teach that little guy. There's dangers there somehow.
Yeah. I noticed that one of the common answers my son will give is, I know. I'm like, hang on, you've never done this before, like ever. Not sure, So I'm still trying to figure out how do I tell him you actually don't know. Figuring that one out, like if any of you have ideas, that would be awesome. I'm still searching that one out because they just want to do it themselves and figure it out the hard way. And okay, most of it I'm like, for sure, go for it. Some you have to step in and say this is dangerous. Yeah.
What is your daughter Victoria? What generation is she?
You know, right. That's a great point. I want to clarify. Not everybody born in 1995 to 2010 is going to think the same way as everybody else in their generation. I think a lot of my kids were born with my wife's and our values in the way that we like to learn. They get very frustrated with the way Generation Z is doing it. So not everybody is the same. I want to preface that and make sure, be clear about that. 2000, all of my kids are Generation Z. I have 4. They're all Generation Z. Yeah. Wow. I just realized that. No wonder. That makes so much sense. Anyways. Confessions. Well, we're amongst family. We can confess, right? Okay.
One comment I have is that you mentioned about being in a church. Some of us aren't in church regularly. Mm-hmm. So maybe a little more when you do presentations, not be cognizant of the fact that not all of us attend church regularly, kind of thing.
Yeah, I've tried not to. Most society attends a church even once a year of some kind. So I'm sort of banking on that you'll go to a ceremony or a religious ceremony of some kind at some point. So when I say religious institution, typically there's...
Yeah, you'd mentioned coming into the church kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I had... Well, smack me. Where are you?
No.
Something at me.
No.
Oh. Okay. I'm trying to be neutral.
I have a question in terms of because the Generation Z is so much different, and it's hard to relate for other generations to that generation. But what do you think is maybe that you can see that you can put your finger on is maybe the one biggest contributor to the biggest difference between others? And I don't know if there's any studies on that. And
yeah, I think, boy, what's the one thing that's really
technology
the biggest?
or
yeah, I mean,
Massive.
The amount of technology that they access, but adults are doing it more and more. We're almost as guilty now, right? I think their emotional sensitivity is probably one of the bigger differences still. I think that their emotional regulation needs a lot of work. That's why I've had to talk on podcasts about developing grit in Generation Z, because it's tough.
Yeah.
They really struggle with that emotional vulnerability and recognizing what their emotions are and voicing what they are.
right.
But yeah, mental health is a big one.
Yeah, and then also just a quick comment on the suicides and how it correlates to like screen time. I never really saw that before, but I thought that was interesting. Any other information? Yeah, where it talks about risk start to increase with screen time.
Yeah, I mean, I know that coming out of COVID, and I didn't have that stat on here, 40% of Generation Z feel that they are in depression. No other generation had ever said that they were running those kinds of numbers for depression, like just chronically depressed. So that's significant. Like, what do you even do with that?
Is there, when they're looking at that, those screen time, is there anything that, is it just a screen time, or is it things that they're normally doing on the screen that actually contributes even higher? Social media, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously social media is going to be influencing them, but neurologists are realizing that the amount of screen time that even little children can have directly affects how their neurons are being wired in their brain. And so that's why so many of these CEOs are not even letting their children on, because tactile learning, auditory learning, all the different styles of learning are very different than the technological kind of learning that there is. And so they're saying, this is dangerous. Our brains are being hardwired differently than any other generation, and it's not in a good way. So, neuroplasticity, all of that stuff is really revealing some interesting stuff about little kids. And the technology companies know this. They're trying to create younger and younger apps, younger and younger content. And there's some pretty significant parent movements in the US that are saying no, and they're signing up people that they won't allow their kids to get on technology until a certain age. Like, they're really trying to create awareness about that. So.
Yeah, they're going to be doing that in September, where they're saying no cell phones are allowed in school.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, how are they going to handle that?
I don't know, because
What they're saying, you know,
I mean,
what we see.
my calculator's on here. That's what I'd be accessing. And they just allowed that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Yeah, it's gonna be tough.
Challenge.
It'll be tough. Yeah, and that should include the teacher too. But we'll see.
Texting for help.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, if you restrict the person from using their devices, do you have to replace it with something, or, because, you know, they'll be lost without it?
Oh, I know. And my dad quit smoking 2 packs a day, and he found it was this habit of doing this that drove him nuts the most. So he actually learned. He bought cases of spits. You know those
Seeds.
sunflower
Seeds.
Sunflower seeds. That's what he would do because it was such an oral habit. He would just eat sunflower seeds. He ate them by the case.
Yeah.
I'm sure all that salt wasn't good for him, but that's how he quit smoking, because it was such a habit. So you're right. Now, if they're going to be banning looking at their phone, and some of the most damaging research around kids and why they're accessing their phones is because they want to know if they've gotten feedback about the latest thing that they posted. And they found that if they don't get any replies to any of their posts within a certain amount of minutes, they start to enter into depression. And so they're really trying to eliminate. That's one of the reasons why they're eliminating it from schools, because they're constantly checking on their posts to see if they're liked or if somebody agrees or is watching their content. Because if they're not, then they're not liked as an individual. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens if they can't even access their phone. We're going to have a whole few months of depression come September here.
Yeah, well, I mean, because of circumstances, I'm not on as much. So if I don't answer, people get upset.
Yeah. I was wondering. I've been reaching out to you lately.
Yeah.
Gotten no response.
I mean, just posting.
Like,
even
you'd think
questions,
you'd-
whatever.
Yeah, but you could reply as soon as I send you something. I don't know why you
Need to
ignore me for a
reply,
couple of
yeah.
days, a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for coming and listening to Generation Z. Thanks. That was different, huh? Different than the addictions one?
It was good. I really appreciated it. Yeah. I think it's important that we get this information, because sometimes there's a disconnect, and we're trying to connect with the younger generation. And I think this information just makes it very practical and to understand what we're up against when we're looking to connect. And so I think that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Brother James. Okay, so what we're going to do at this time, and just a quick reminder, tomorrow we have our final session with Brother James. He's going to be speaking about what?
Understanding and managing stress.
Understanding and managing stress. You know, what they say is stress kills. And actually, it's one of probably the biggest killer that we have, because everything can be linked back to stress. breaks down your immune system, everything. So don't miss that. That's going to be tomorrow at 5 p.m., okay? We're going to go back to 5 p.m. So we're grateful. Again, thank you so much. We're going to have a word of prayer, and we do have some refreshments. So please stick around and have some refreshments with us. And so let's bow our heads for a word of prayer, okay? Father, thank you so much for the information that we've learned today. Lord, you always want us to reach out. And Lord, we want to be able to reach our younger generations, Lord. These are the future of our nations. And so, Lord, thank you for the information that was presented. And now, Father, we ask that you would help us to understand it more and know how to apply it so that we may be able to use this in a very practical way, reaching out to our young people. We thank you as well for the food that has been prepared, and bless the hands that have prepared this, Lord, and bless the food. In Jesus' name, amen.